Everyone, welcome to journey number 9. And today I'm joined by George Visan. Did I get that right?
You did not screw
Okay.
up.
I broke the streak of fucking up names like I told you before. But how are you doing today?
Lovely. We got like 3 feet of snow this time last year, so the fact that fall is still a thing amazes me. Um, yeah, what are you, Jared?
Good, good. Yeah, me too. I've like every day I just expect to wake up and it just be white outside. So I'm quite
Yeah,
quite happy that there's still sunshine.
I live in this really cute neighborhood too, Bridgeland,
Okay.
and the neighborhood kids are like raking our lawns, and people are making cookies and putting up Halloween decorations. So it feels like Ferris Bueller's neighborhood. Uh,
Yeah,
so that also adds to the whole feel.
love that. Yeah. So kind of getting into it, I guess to start, if you could just kind of give us some context on, like who you are, where you grew up, what kind of things you were doing, what you were like as a child, things like that.
Okay, pretty open-ended. Well, okay, so I was born in Romania. I immigrated here as a child with both my parents, who are also from Romania. I come from a generation of farmers, and I'm a child of divorce, and I grew up with my dad, and love both my parents. Have preferences, but grew up like I think many immigrant kids, probably getting like bullied a lot. But it contributed to, like, yeah, these days I'm very grateful because it contributed to an overall sense of, uh, generally speaking, like most problems are pretty small for me now just because I've been through the fucking ringer.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just like all immigrant families, I just, as soon as I came out of the womb, I got stamped with like doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah.
So um, in high school, I found that like school, I don't know, just wasn't working for me for some reason. And part of it had to do with that pressure from family. I'm sure, like, you're a kid and you just rebel, and the one thing that I had to rebel against was the top priority for my parents, which was schooling.
Yeah.
And that led me down the path of like starting a business in university. So ran this College Pro franchise where they take students, they give them a business, they help with the upfront costs, and that business is house painting, so interior exterior house painting. And I dropped out of school to do that in university. I dropped out second semester because I was going to school like 8 to 5, and then just knocking on doors all winter, like 5 to 8, 5 to 9, oftentimes in balaclavas and mitts, knocking on people's doors when
Yeah.
it's dark out, which has a pretty bad look. But I had a bright yellow clipboard and like an ear to ear smile, so it was fine. Um, and I liked that business, and it was really challenging. But I was able to hire a team of people and keep them employed over the summer. 6 university students who were able to pay off that year's tuition, and I just really like that. So I basically continued into entrepreneurship in another capacity, but I'm sure we'll get into that. So that's my context, I guess.
Cool. I love that. And as you were talking, I think that we spoke years ago because I did a really similar business just with a different company, Scholar's Edge. While I was in
Scholar's Edge, yeah.
Yeah, and so I know all about the knocking on doors and the mittens and freezing cold and trying to convince people that you're going to paint their house like 6 months from now. So,
Yeah,
well, we need to go over some more stories for sure on that for another day. But
totally.
yeah, kind of going back to something, and it's interesting. It has been a little bit of a common theme with some of the people that I've talked to, is the idea of like getting bullied growing up, right? And so like I was bullied a lot when I was growing up as well, and it kind of stemmed from me moving schools right in the middle of elementary and not necessarily having those relationships with kids, which took a couple of years to develop. And do you, like, for me, I think a lot of it came from also almost what's the word of like ignorance, of like not understanding that like not everyone just didn't want to be my friend, right? And like that's kind of what I just thought of,
Mm.
just like, oh, everybody wants to be my friend, and then going in and like, well, wait, they're being mean to me, this doesn't make sense, like they still want to be my friend, right? And so um you said that you were
Yeah.
born in Romania. Do you think that for you, like, was it, you know did people pick up on that, like was there a language barrier, was there again, the idea of like coming in halfway through, like where do you think that sort of started?
Yeah, it didn't help. It didn't help that I had an accent, like a funny haircut. My parents wanted me to look proper and have a comb over, like a slicked back comb over in grade 3. That doesn't fly, you know.
Yeah.
Everyone has like Heelys and is like playing hockey and playing basketball, and I just don't do those things. Um, so it wasn't a language barrier, but it was like I was also a little bit chubby. So it was like, who's this, you know, kid that's fresh off the boat? We don't know him. And I think generally speaking, kids are pretty averse to things that they don't know, including people.
Yeah.
And like I was too, you know, I don't think that I bullied people, but there were probably times where I did, and just
Yeah.
because I didn't like know them. So it's not, I'm not just like a pure victim, or it's not all on me, but I think just being different is a pretty common theme
Mhm.
in my life, and forever it was a bad thing until, I don't know, like late adolescence or like early adulthood, that I realized it was a gigantic fucking edge.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like such a good look on it too of realizing that a lot of strength comes from, hardships or difficult times, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it was a little bit different where I completely ignored it and went like, oh, this didn't affect me at all until, 2 years ago. And then being like, okay, you know what? Actually, like, a lot of what I learned about relationships and friendships and everything like that were molded from back then, from when I was a child. And, kind of that idea that like people people treating me badly shows me that they want to be my friend or want a relationship with me. And so that was a little bit of unlearning that I had to do, on my end. And it's really been a tough journey of, now that I realize that, wrapping my head around, the idea of, those hardships that I went through also have created who I am today. And so actually being thankful for them, even though they sucked, like really fucking sucked. But trying to change that, where being thankful for them for what it has given me, as well as acknowledging, the negative effects as well.
This is something that I've been thinking about. So I want to ask you, like, why did you gravitate towards trying to make something out of people that are clearly not into like being good people to you? Because I would gravitate towards, I don't know, like, and we see this a lot. You put effort into people that don't give a shit about you, or that treat you like shit, but that needs to start somewhere. And like, I think that it probably started with my parents, just like being really busy immigrants, working super hard, having university degrees, but not applying in Canada. So they have to like, huge chip on their shoulder, too busy for their kid. And so it probably started with my parents, but like, how, why was it the case for you? How'd you move past it?
For sure. And yeah, like for me, it started with my parents as well. Um, and it was a big realization that I've come to, again, probably just in the last year here. But, and it's not, I've worked really hard to make sure that I'm not blaming my mom, but acknowledging that, as a child, the way that I took it led to my relationships today. And so what I mean by that
Hmm.
is, my mom's advice when I came home and told her that I was being picked on, right? Or that like the kids, I wasn't getting along with the kids, or, that they didn't actually, want me to play with them, whatever it might have been. Her advice was, oh, they actually just want to be your friends. And so if you're nice to them, like that's why they're doing it. They're doing it because they actually want to be your friends. Like they're not doing it because they don't like you. And so subconsciously, I took that as like, okay,
Yeah.
people treating me poorly shows me that they care about me. Right. And that was kind of subconsciously put into my brain in elementary school.
Yeah.
And so throughout my entire life, that's what I would search for. Right. Is I would search for relationships where people put me down, or were uneven or whatever it might be, because in my mind, that showed me that they cared about me. And it was almost like an uncomfortable feeling if somebody was only nice. And I'm like,
Sure.
this is weird. Like they can't just like me. Like they can't just be nice to me all the time. Like that doesn't fit the narrative that I've told myself for, 15 years. And yeah, it wasn't until I realized that and then saw that it played out in basically all of my relationships that I've ever had, relationships being romantic, friendships, whatever it might be, is like, not only a tolerance for it, but almost searching for it, where, they treat me poorly or put me down sometimes, because to me, that is what a relationship is supposed to be.
Wild that you're able to, I don't know, remember the moment that triggered that. Because these unconscious patterns definitely start with a single moment, just like one conversation, but it's hard to pinpoint most of the time. So
Yeah.
fascinated that you recall that.
Yeah. And it's funny too, of like, what we recall and what we don't recall, because I very clearly remember that. Right. And I remember like who it was. I remember what I ended up doing. And I think it's funny because there's almost like a false reinforcement as well. Because what ended up happening was there was one specific boy I remember, and I think it might have been a couple, but I remember one specific of, he was picking on me, and I told my mom, and she said, "Oh, like, he just wants to be friends." And so I went, okay. So I went to school, and basically, it's so funny that like I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I went to school and I asked him if he wanted to race. And I was like, okay, he actually just wants to be my friend. Let's find something that we can do. And then
Okay.
asked him to race. And we would race for like a week, and then we ended up becoming friends. And so it was that
Wow.
like it, and again, this is probably grade 2, because that's when I moved schools. And so, that false positive of like, oh, this person that was picking on me actually did want to be my friend. Therefore, everybody who picks on me wants to be my friend if I try hard enough, right?
Gotcha. So it ended up working fine this time, but as a general rule of thumb, is maybe not the best.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so,
Cool.
yeah, it's, it was something also that I've really kind of dug into with my therapist of, the idea that a lot of what we know are opinions that were formed when we were in elementary, junior high school, when we were very, very young. And,
Yeah.
we form these opinions, and they just become facts to us, you know, as our life goes on. And then when we actually become aware of them and looking back on them and going, oh, like now as a 26-year-old, is that lesson the same that, I had decided when I was 12? Most of the
Yeah.
time it's not. And so going back and seeing what's actually, quote unquote true, and what I've decided is true.
I've called those opinions, I've just called them stories. Like these stories get made up where we're the main character and the story follows a plot.
Yeah.
But we kind of just like, wow, we don't write them for ourselves. We wind up in them as children and as we go into adolescence. And only in the past like couple of years have I been able to look back and say like, I don't want that story, but I'll write a new one.
Yeah.
Like that story is not factual because
Yeah.
none of this, no life's factual. Nothing's real,
Yeah.
which is kind of no. I'm not a nihilist, but yeah, the stories get to be rewritten in a way that is like super empowering.
Yeah.
But they go unobserved. Worst case scenario, they go unobserved your entire life.
Yeah.
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 In best case, like you do the work, you find a therapist, you talk to your friends, you meditate, and you really look inwards in times of difficulty and try to like unpack what's happening.
Yeah.
That's best case,
Yeah. I,
personally.
I love that idea of like, being put into the story. Right. And yeah. And then for me, when you were talking, when you said that, it was like realizing that you're in control of the story, right? You can choose your own story. You don't have
Yeah.
to go along with the one that's been presented to you. I'm curious, can you pick out anything specific of like from those times when you were younger, of like a lesson that you learned or a story that you told yourself that you now um, push against? Like, does anything specific come to mind?
Yeah, two things come to mind. The first one's money. I wound up in a story that money's bad
Mm,
because there was only negative context around money. There was obviously like, we need to have more because we were pretty broke forever. But it wasn't just about like being broke. It was about anytime a conversation about money came up, it had a negative context. So it was, oh, this person owes me, or we don't have enough, or I'm not being paid enough, or it's always, it's always leaving, it's never coming in. So I generally started to associate like bad feelings with money. And in my adolescence, I started to earn and, get jobs.
Hmm.
I would just get rid of it. Like I would just spend it because keeping it would bring negative consequences, is the
Yeah.
story. And obviously there's that whole conversation around like rich people are evil. And that was a part of it, but I knew that I was never, or rather I thought that I was never going to be super wealthy or rich. So I didn't think that I was going to become some evil genius. It was more about like, if I had any level of comfort or mediocrity, like something bad was going to happen. So that was one conversation. And second one was around like women. And I guess the context was, learn this from my dad, or maybe rather like learned what not to do. But it was like they come and they go,
Yeah.
because I had like a broken family. There was just like a revolving door of partners on my dad's end. Um, and so I think that conversation, the story that I wound up in there was, yeah, they come and they go, but at the same time, put a lot of emphasis on filling a void. Like didn't have a mother figure, didn't have a consistent like uh, leader that was a woman.
Yeah.
And yeah, in recent years, that's just like been totally abolished. And like I do have female leaders right now in my life, and there's no void to fill. So I guess those are two that come to mind.
Cool. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah.
Okay.
And, it's funny. A lot of times I feel like kids, as children, we either end up following very closely in our parents' path or pushing 100% against them and doing the
Hmm.
exact opposite, right? And 99% of the time, it's actually somewhere in the middle. And so even just realizing that of, yeah, like for me, that's been huge. If I can't just do the exact opposite, or I can't do the exact same as either of my parents, because neither works for me, right? And
Hmm.
it might have worked for them, and sometimes it hasn't worked for them. But either way, finding that middle ground and finding truly like trying to take those lessons that I learned and apply them to myself instead of taking them as fact. And that's the way that things need to be done, or
Yeah.
that's the way things aren't done, and so I have to do the opposite.
I think you nailed it in terms of applying it to yourself. And ultimately, it is so fucking rad when you start to decide for yourself what you like. And you can just pick and choose. You can go like this and this, and oh, hold on, not that. And that's what Jared likes. That's what George likes.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be about polar opposites or like focusing in entirely on one thing, because we learned that. But uh, as I've grown, it's just been totally a game of, I can like what I like, and I don't need to like the things that I have liked previously or that I'm told to like. And life is just better when I choose those things wholeheartedly.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. um yeah, and so I guess switching gears a little bit, you and we connected for the first time in a couple of years, I think, a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
and ended up going for a drink and like, saying publicly to you that it was one of the most, one of the best conversations I've had in a really long time. And I didn't go in with the expectations of just no expectations really. And then ended up having a really good chat and really thankful for that chat. And I've been thinking about it a
Me
lot.
too.
Um, and one of the things that really stood out for me was, you mentioned that you have a very close group of male friends and that you guys have always, told each other that you love each other and, complimented each other. And, you know, that seems so foreign to me. It's just a new concept in the last, little while that, men can say, I love you to each other and they can compliment each other. And it's not just, constant putting each other down or too insecure to, say that I love you in a
Yeah.
platonic way. Right. And I was just curious, if you have any insight on how that developed. Do you think it's just the type of people that you are in general, and so you happen to gravitate towards each other? Was it something that developed as you guys were friends over a period of time? Because I think it's super uncommon, but also super healthy. And so, yeah, just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
I wish that I could reverse engineer this a little bit for you, but thinking back on the times that I met all of these guy friends, if let's just say like 3 of them were already hanging out and I'd be the new person to the group, right off the bat, it would just be like immediate kindness and respect for one another. So I have no idea how it formed. I think that ultimately it comes down to the type of people that we are.
Mhm.
I know for me, I put so much emphasis into friends because they're my chosen family.
Yeah,
Like as someone who didn't have uh, people to lean on, like my friends became that, and they became pillars. So I do so much to like maintain and respect those pillars, and I think uh, they reciprocate that. And if I found people who didn't reciprocate that, then I would just piece the fuck out until I find people who do. And now we've just reached this like mutual understanding, and know what it takes. I think we all just know what it takes to maintain these friendships and see just how magical they are. And so it's easier to uphold, but I have no idea how it started because I don't know how you walk into a group of friends that you don't know and start, at least maybe in adolescence and probably in adulthood too, you meet a group of guys for the first time and start being anti-toxic masculinity, start being kind, like start complimenting people. It seems like a big step, but I don't know. I think it's required to set a precedent for what that friendship is going to be.
for sure. No, yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's something that I've struggled with too, right? Is like, how do you set up a relationship to be that way, right? And for me, when I think about it, I feel like a lot of it is just even removing, call it, like a stigma around it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
just making it okay for healthy relationships like that. And, almost, just by like kind of leading by example, right? Of showing people that it's okay, showing people that you can still be, call it masculine and in touch with your feelings and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, that's a really interesting balance that I've put a lot of thought into, right? Because a lot of times I feel, when people hear about like friendships like that between men, it's, oh, they're probably like, like super spiritual, super passive, super, like in touch with their feminine. And sure, and that's true. And like that's also more than okay. And I think too, the idea of adding some of those into what masculinity is as a whole, I think is super important. And so I was so excited and so glad to hear that you had those relationships with your friends, because outside of the new group of men that I started surrounding myself with, I'd never seen that. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's super cool to see another group that's completely removed have something similar.
It is so magical. And I was on a date. I was on a date last night, and one of my friends texted me. I just told this girl I love her, and so I'm not normally on my phone on
Yeah.
dates, but I had to just turn to her and be like, "Look, this is what he just said. We're gonna have a quick conversation right now. I'm gonna text him back."
Yeah.
And then I texted another friend who's a friend of this friend, and we started talking about it. Uh, and she was floored. She's like, I didn't know that guys do that. Like, it's so cute that you guys are just talking about this right now
Yeah.
and that you're bouncing ideas off one another." And I was floored that she was floored because to me, it's normal. It like, I do that to my friends. Um, that's just the kind of conversations that we have. But it was interesting to hear that is, not the norm. Because I call it maybe ignorance or just being oblivious, but I just pay attention to the circle that I have, and it surprises me that there's guys who don't do that, and I just don't pay that any thought because I feel like a crackhead. My brain's always spinning, and I just don't have time for that. So
Yeah,
it surprises me that there are still contexts where, you know, guys can't reach out to one another about things that they're very excited about,
yeah,
and that girls particularly see that as like a huge step for men.
for sure.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, no, that's so cool, and I love that. And sometimes those reactions are like the things that sink in most of something that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
either like is just normal to you or just something that you've done and you don't expect the reaction back. And like, so what comes up for me was a story of I was at one of the King of Hearts heart to heart events before COVID, and so we were there in a group of people, and the idea of men struggling with body image came up.
Hmm.
And we were talking about it. A lot of the guys kind of chimed in, and then there were these, I think it was 2 or 3 girls, and when it was their turn to speak, like the first thing that came out of their mouth was like, I didn't know that guys struggled with this. And being like, yeah, yeah, right. And like the idea that it's been so driven into us that we're not allowed to, that people from the outside just think that it's not a thing, right? And so
Yeah.
having those open conversations and just like telling people of like, yeah, these are things that go on, or these are things that I do, and again, just almost normalizing it. Like, it doesn't have to be a
Exactly.
big deal, it doesn't have to be like life changing, but just normalizing it, I think, is a huge step.
That's a really good point on the body image, but specifically saying it without a lot of significance behind it. Like, yeah, we struggle with it too, but I'm still going to eat breakfast today.
Yeah,
Like it's just a thing that we struggle with, and not making. I want to say not making mountains out of molehills, but that's also not to say that there are some contexts where it requires to be a mountain, like where it really requires someone to address it and get close to it. But just having it be another thing that is taking up mental space for us, something that we deal with and that we talk about, is huge. Another thing that needs to be normalized in order for guys to be more affectionate, I think, is just being gay. Okay, so like not that being affectionate or being nice to your guy friends or like talking about your lives is gay, but that's the first thing that comes up. Like, no, I don't want to seem gay, right? Those things are gay
yeah,
because there's just negative context around like who you choose as a romantic partner. If we could just stop doing that,
yeah,
then maybe guys will feel more inclined to be like emotionally available with their guy friends, with
yeah,
their romantic partners, be that male or female. But specifically, like, yeah, straight cis white guys who are afraid of appearing gay. It's all good, man. Like, you don't need to worry about that because being gay is also awesome, and you can
yeah,
tell your friends you love them and they look great.
yeah, yeah. It's so funny how that's the almost automatic reaction, right, to everything,
Yeah,
right? Is like, oh, you've you've acknowledged a feeling, that means you're gay, right? Like, you complimenting another guy, like, must be gay, right? And it's so
oh,
crazy of like how that works, right? And it's funny, even just thinking about it right now, it's drilled. I felt like it was drilled into me at a very young age too,
yes, I was just gonna say that.
right? Of like, I remember, in junior high, of like, that was the response to a lot of things. Like, oh, what are you, gay? Right?
Yeah,
And yeah, just again, removing that, like you're saying, almost removing the stigma around that. And like, if you are, cool, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. Um, and just because you, yeah, you compliment a guy or are in touch with your feelings also does not mean that you're automatically gay.
bingo,
Yeah.
bingo.
Cool. So switching gears a little bit, and we touched on it at the beginning, is a little bit of entrepreneurship. And I guess, can you kind of take us through your journey with that? So you did College Pro while you're in university, and then continued to do it afterwards.
Yep.
And that's actually how we met. And so just kind of take us through that journey on what happened next.
Cool. So at some point, I was like, construction's not cool. I hate construction. Let's try and do something else. I know how to run a business and lead a team. So I saw a gap in the market where I had all these loyalty cards in my wallet. Um, and I thought that, it was time to get into tech. So I took all my savings and I started this company called Sprout that basically created loyalty programs for small and medium businesses. It let people connect their debit and credit cards to said loyalty programs, so you could just earn points automatically. And basically, as soon as I had that idea, well, first of all, I didn't know anyone in tech. I thought that being like a tech founder or whatever just meant living in Costa Rica and clinking Coronas with the bartender, like just wearing a funny hat and living the dream.
Yeah.
And very quickly, I had a team of like, I don't know, like 25 outsourced people that I had to pay now. And that was very much not the case.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anyone. I didn't know what I was doing. But oddly enough, I was able to get to market within 6 months, and then started to introduce myself to the community. So talking to like accelerators or mentors in tech. And I applied for an accelerator in Calgary, which is where we met. It's just called the Accelerator, Peter Bokoff's, and moved to Calgary. And as soon as I started to immerse myself in the culture, I think is when things started to change. Like I went from a business idea that was able to get to market now to being like a tech founder. And that's kind of the community that I got from the accelerator was very beneficial in making me feel like I was not alone, but it was actually detrimental in focusing on the wrong things. For some reason, plugging into a community had me focus on the externalities of being in tech, as opposed to no one really, back in Edmonton, no one really knew. I wasn't keeping it to myself, but I was just like, let's do this thing, as opposed to making my life about it.
Yeah.
So the difference there is I really started to go down this rabbit hole of like external validation, doing things for the showmanship, doing things because like I still loved it and I thought that it was really important, but ultimately doing things for other people, impressing people that would not show up for me if I called 911 or if there were like lights blaring. So entrepreneurship was I didn't realize that was the case for a long time. And then I read a book in an afternoon, and that book like hit me like a train, and and it changed everything. But yeah, that's I think some of the context.
What book was it that you read?
Oh, it was Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it just might have struck at the right time. You know, sometimes you like watch a movie and it's, man, you watch it later and it's great. So at that point, one of the biggest things that came from the book was this concept of like, a lot of the problems that you have right now, consider that you signed up for those problems, and you may not actually want them. Like you can upgrade your problems to something else. So the problems that I had were like spinning my tires, having a lot of people around me that would not show up if I called 911.
Yeah.
And I was not able to ultimately action on the things that I wanted, and I needed external resources, be that like cash or people with other skills. And I couldn't do those things. I was just fucking tired of it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to upgrade my problem to being behind the scenes, to my new problem being like, how do I spend 8 hours a day learning a skill quietly?
Yeah.
How do I like just be quiet? Quiet mastery is this like notion that I discovered. And it was very impactful. Quiet mastery has been like extremely impactful, which is basically in the antithesis to entrepreneurship, which is like,
yeah.
For me, it was all hubris.
Okay. How so?
You get told to pitch your story, and you get told to make like your story super attractive, and to make your like pitches super attractive. And you are also told to, you know, create a sustainable business model. And, you know, I'm like 21 with no savings. Let's be real. Like somebody who's 21 with no savings, you know, is not going to start a $1 billion company or any kind of like scale until they have a skilled team, you know, and like just really focus on bringing a product to market, which costs money as well. Yeah. It doesn't cost a lot, but you need people around you and you need a little bit of money. So it was hubris because like without those things, you're kind of fucked, you know. Yeah. And I just like kept going.
Yeah.
So the hubris that it was going to happen when there are indicators that it is likely not going to, and that's okay.
Yeah. And while you were sharing that, you spoke to the fact that once you immersing yourself in kind of the community, a lot of the focus shifted to those external factors, right? What would some of those external factors be? Like, can you name any specifically that that you remember?
Yeah, like making a positive impact networking is the biggest one.
Okay.
Networking, just like meeting potential investors, going to pitch nights, meeting other founders, like important, but definitely not even close to as important as gaining a user base that I already had in Edmonton.
Yeah.
Like none of that shit mattered actually. If
Yeah.
I had an actual product that was on the app stores with real people using it, that's fucking miles ahead of where I was when I moved to Calgary. So it was entirely impressing people with gray hair with a cool 2-minute pitch and sexy buzzwords.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we talked about this over a drink, it was like a lot of admiration on my side to hear kind of the step back that you took, right? And how you were willing to kind of take that step back, or perceived step back at least, right? um, because there is, I think, a lot of, call it whatever you want, like a cool factor, sexiness
Yeah.
associated with being an entrepreneur, being in tech, and being part of being a founder, right? And having the self-awareness to realize that it's actually not serving your purpose anymore, and it's not for you, and the humility to take that step back. Can you speak to that a little bit of um, if there was one moment when you finally kind of, so you read the book, and you know um, was that the moment where you're like, okay, I'm not in alignment with what I want to be doing? Was it after that? Did it open your eyes to like something that you hadn't seen before? So I guess just like what made you realize, one, that you weren't on the right path, and
Yeah.
then two, just talking a little bit about the humility to take that perceived step back.
Humility wasn't at the forefront. It was almost like frustration was at the forefront.
Okay.
And it happened immediately as I was reading the book. Because I'm like taking notes, I'm reflecting as I'm reading, chicken scratch everywhere. But the I don't know, the turning point, like the moment of epiphany, was asking myself whether these people would show up if I called 911. Like I know I've said that 5 times already on this call, but all this energy was being spent talking to people that are in my network, be that other founders or potential investors or people who run accelerators or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
None of them would actually show up. And all of my energy was being spent on these relationships. And like, fuck that. That's why frustration's at the forefront, not humility. Because
Gotcha.
like job aside, like entrepreneur sexy aside, I just knew that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah.
And so I decided, if I can't spend my energy on these relationships, which as someone who doesn't have an engineering background, like software, I need to be doing that if I'm going to continue being a founder. I need to be networking, I need to be like pitching and meeting investors and always on. So if I'm not going to do that, well, I just can't do it at all. I can't not network and be a founder without technical skills.
Yeah.
So that's when I dropped it, and moved on to product design, which is a skill that I had been learning over a number of years being a founder. So yeah, humility was not at the forefront, but it's a really important conversation because of just how sexy being, a CEO running your own business is perceived. It's just like the pinnacle of success.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it rings true for me, right? Of realizing that I didn't feel authentic in putting on that show.
Yeah.
Right. Of I felt like I was putting on a show for other people to try to impress other people, And
Yep.
like, in reality, and what I've come to have a lot of clarity around, which, you know, I'm very glad for myself, is that I actually enjoy doing like the dirty work of like actually running the business, actually, you know, going through that. And what I didn't enjoy was putting on that mask of like, oh, you know what? I actually just had a fucking shitty day, like a really shitty day with employees and money and, you know, challenges and suppliers and whatever it might be. And then, you know, like worried about making payroll, worried about if I'm going to be able to pay people. And then all of a sudden going into a meeting and being like, oh yeah, everything's going great. You know, everything's perfect.
Yeah.
We're doing so well, like no problems at all. And, you know, really feeling that disconnect was one of the big, you know, one of the big rubs, let's call it, that, you know, had me feeling inauthentic, and one of the reasons why I decided to change things up, you know, at the beginning of the year. um, yeah, so no, I want to commend you for, you know, even if it wasn't your driving factor, it would still did take a lot of humility to follow through.
Thank
And
you.
that was a big one for me too, where I was like, you know, having this sexy title of,
Yeah.
sexy title and responsibility, and, you know, being quote unquote important to people, and then kind of walking away from all of it and like going and working in a restaurant essentially as like a glorified busboy for a couple months because I needed to pay the bills. Right. And it took a lot for me to get through that. And I had to tell myself a story while I was there of like, you know, one day I'll be able to tell this to people. It'll make a great story of like, and that's what got me through it, you know, and
Yeah.
helped me not get too down on myself of like, you know, this perceived 10 steps backwards, but knowing, you know, in my heart that I needed to do it in order to go 100 forward. So
I I think I can speak for both of us when I say that that transition gave us our power back, because there's this total dynamic with being a founder. It's like, yes, you're your own boss, but no, you definitely still report to people. You definitely still need to ask people for things. Um, and it fascinates me that there's like successful, you know, or like the people who go to pitch events to potentially, and I obviously have a chip on my shoulder about this, it's starting to show. Uh, why are you a successful tech executive watching a 21-year-old pitch? Like the power imbalance there is fucking bonkers. It's a waste of time. Someone should have told me that like that's not going to happen and that I should be focusing on different things. And there was one time that I got eviscerated. I was actually at our private pitch night, not the when we went to Denton's or
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
prior. I got eviscerated in one of those rooms by someone who's like pretty big in Calgary.
yeah,
And I just had like, are you getting off by that? Like, why is that even a system? There should be, there should just be a larger barrier to entry. I think like not everyone can be a founder. Not everyone idea is going to make it.
yeah,
Should really focus on like back to business basics, really simple economics of selling something for a profit.
yes,
That's the first stage.
yeah,
The showmanship is like very much like a C, D, E priority.
yeah,
And unless that basic economics are there, it's all showmanship. So I really wonder like why without basic economics present in these pitch nights, people who know the economics are wasting their fucking time. What is it for? Because I got eviscerated and I didn't come across like, I don't think I left that any the wiser except for really understanding what the power dynamic was like.
yeah,
So leaving, and then you worked in a restaurant, and I went and worked at Safeway. Despite the surface level sexiness of job appearance, I got my power back.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a huge thing. And like just you speaking to those basic economics is something that is really speaking to me. And, you know, I wonder too if it's almost uh, where we got our quote unquote business training of like, you know, when you're out there trying to paint houses for a summer so you can pay for tuition, like that's what you're doing. You're trying to make profit, right?
Yeah,
And it's just like, okay, well, I manage my expenses, I manage my labor, and then I make a profit at the end of the day. Instead of
yeah,
this idea of like, I'm going to sell you this great story so that you give me a ton of money. so that I lose it as fast as possible so that I can then go and raise more. Right. There's always a disconnect for me on that of like,
Yeah,
well, but this like, this company isn't actually doing anything or getting any traction or making any money. And like, what's the point? Right. And for me, there's that big disconnect. And I'm not taking anything away from, the very few that as a model, that is what they need to do. Like
totally.
companies like Uber or, some of these huge unicorns where like, that is the business model of like, they know they're going to lose money and they build $1 billion companies, and that's amazing. And that's the 0.00001%.
Yeah,
Right. And so, yeah, there's always a big disconnect for me on that. And I think we're very aligned on it. So,
agreed.
yeah. And we're running out of time here, but, one of the last things I wanted to touch on is a really cool conversation that we had about kind of just your journey on reimagining what relationships look like to you, and kind of,
Yeah,
not just going along with specifically what society says how they should look. And so if you could just talk to that a little bit.
yeah. I came out of a long, like 3-year relationship in February, and then I guess I just noticed that I like wanted to meet people, but the underlying question was like, how do you do that? Because the follow up from meeting someone is like immediately gauging whether you're going to date them, and that's just like the story,
Yeah.
the opinion that has been formed over a while for I think a lot of people. Like, you don't just meet someone casually and then go like, cool, like thanks for your time, I really enjoyed that, like, but thank you. That's not a thing that we've learned how to do.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, this year has been a year of asking questions for me. During Black Lives Matter, the question was like, are there ways that I'm subtly racist? Like, there are definitely ways that I benefit from systemic racism. So I wanted to like ask myself, how do I uncover those? With shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, there's questions like, are there ways that I'm subtly homophobic? Are there ways that I'm perpetuating toxic masculinity? And then I was like, well, hold on a sec. Like, if I'm asking those questions, well, can I ask those questions to relationships? So the question was, are there options besides exclusive monogamy and being single? Are there ways that individuals can share time? Specifically, can a man meet a woman and be emotionally available, be vulnerable, be chivalrous, but like not immediately need to get into a relationship? Can that dynamic there exist? Can people share time with each other, and not go right into I love you, right into let's get married? Can people in their 20s like just experience time together in a transparent way without making a whole thing about it?
Yeah.
So that's been like a really awesome question for me, because in the absence of that, there's very much like a need to come across a certain way such that that other person gauges you as potential life partner material.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it didn't work for me in the past. So I just wanted to see if there was something else, and there is. So for everyone out there, like, you don't need to rush into a relationship. You and this other person can be whole and come together and enjoy your time together and see where it goes. And that's totally okay. You don't need to label it.
For sure. And, it's such an interesting conversation that we had around, well, everything, but specifically, around relationships like this. And, for me, it goes back to one word that you said there, which I think is one of the most important, which is transparency, right? Transparency and open communication, and setting your intentions from the get-go of like, this is where I'm at. These are the questions that I'm asking. These are, some of the ideas that I'm challenging, or, and just being open and honest with that person. And I think where a lot of the problems arise is when people, I think it comes back to shame, right? Is that they have shame around, I'm not supposed to be doing this, or like, this isn't what people do, or this is what I'm allowed to do, and therefore I'm going to lie, right? Or
Yeah.
hide pieces of who I am or what I'm doing. And, you know, that's where I believe a lot of hurt comes from, right? And a lot of hurt and a lot of the issues with, you know, relationships are tricky no matter what they look like. Relationships with another human being are always tricky. And I think a lot of the problems come from hiding pieces of yourself or hiding intentions from that other person, where,
Yeah.
you know, they're now making decisions on information that isn't correct or not, when they don't have the full picture.
And people tend to hide things in order to fit into the ideal of a relationship that we've been sold as a society. So people will like hide that they're seeing somebody else because the perceived right thing to do is to only see one person and be monogamous. And I'm not bashing monogamy, because clearly monogamy works. Like, people get married and it's very effective. It's just that there are potentially other options. That's all. And so asking, and going full circle back to in the beginning, we talked about like discovering what as an individual you want. If you want to see multiple people, cool, tell them.
Yeah.
Just like, hi,
Yeah.
right now I'm interested in like casual dating. I'm seeing some other people, but you know what? Does not detract from like what I think that we have together. We can still emotionally connect, and I can still see other people. Like, to me, that's true. That's true. So as long as it's true to you, whatever's true to you, share that, and be fully transparent about it, and let someone not be down with it.
Yeah.
You know, that it doesn't need to be their truth either, but it's so much better if, rather than two people like living 70% by their truths coming together, that's going to fail. You'd rather have like two people 100% living their truths, agreeing or disagreeing, and walking away from it.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's such an important piece too, is it is okay if another person is not okay with what you're doing. Right.
Yeah.
And when I say that, of like, you know, this is kind of where I'm at, this is my situation. And, you know, being, you know, truthful and transparent with you, this is kind of what it is. And, you know, they don't have to be in that same spot, right? Like, they don't have to automatically be okay with it. It's okay to disagree. And I think, you know, a lot of times that's where the conflict comes from, is the position of I'm right, you're wrong.
Totally.
Right. And either like I'm right for my beliefs, or you're wrong for not thinking the exact same thing that I think. And yeah, just being okay with it. Right. And so I think that's so important.
This really beautiful thing happens when two people start to live their truth together, or discover what that means. Because like a couple months ago, I didn't actually know what that was. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what that truth was, but I was dedicated to uncovering that. And when two people come together and don't make this traditional view of monogamy their truth, they can actually create something beautiful together. They can actually fully invest as two individuals who know what they like and know what they want, and create something that is wholly theirs, and that maybe doesn't look like a traditional relationship, but is by design. Like, it is so beautiful for a relationship to be by design, as opposed to this stupid fucking fairy tale of love at first sight and I fell in love. You know, like, I don't need to fall in love. Like, I want to choose love. Falling in love is, I just don't do things anymore that are not by choice. But on the topic of someone else not liking it, it's, yeah, that has to be okay. You gotta let them think that. And also, don't start to question whether what you want is wrong just because somebody else thinks so. Because there's definitely people who are like, nope, exclusive monogamy, that's the way to go. And initially I was like, well, shit, maybe they're right. But I found that that's not the case, as long as what I'm doing isn't harming other people.
Yeah.
So
that's my big one, is like, you know, with almost all things, I go back to like, you know, it, and you know, doesn't sound pretty, but like, I don't care what you're doing as long as you're not hurting anybody. Right.
yeah.
Like, why should it affect me? Right. Like, I don't care. And I'm just naturally curious. So I love learning about things anyways. And it's trying to just remove a lot of that judgment or the shoulds of that's not what you
Totally.
should do, or that's not how
Yeah.
it's supposed to look. So yeah, love that. And yeah, I mean, we're running out of time here. So just before we go, is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to, or anything that you wanted to bring up before I let you go?
Guys, start telling your friends that you love them. Be emotionally available. Don't lie to women. And donate if you have extra money.
I love that. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks,
Really
Jared.
did have an amazing time. Where can people connect?
Amazing host.
Thank you.
An amazing host, Jared. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Where can people connect with you if they want to get in touch?
I don't know. I didn't think about this. I guess like by email. I don't have Facebook.
Sure. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, email.
Yeah.
info@georgevasan.com. I'm sure you have like links in bio or however podcasts work.
Yeah, I'll put that in there.
Yeah.
Amazing. And my last question here for you is just, what does the next phase in your journey look like?
Next phase in keeping like where I'm at right now. Right now, I have friends and family that I love and a job that I love, and I'm just gonna maintain that and stay with the gratitude in such hectic times that we have around the world. I'm so fortunate that my next journey is just like maintaining gratitude.
Love that. Amazing. Once
Yeah.
again, thank you. We'll connect soon. And yeah, just amazing
Okay.
talking to you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jared. Take care.